Yo, what's going on, Dragon Ballers? Welcome back to another deck profile. This is the deck I would have played if I went to the CGU New Jersey 1K. If you saw the video yesterday, we covered the top cut breakdown of that event. It was very, very cool to see kind of like the limbo format where it was before set 11, but it was still implementing the Bibidi nerf. This is the deck I was going to play either way because it was a little bit undecided up until the last week whether or not they were going to go with the nerf or not. So I was going to play Clash Goku. So we're getting into the deck. If you guys are new here, make sure to subscribe, hit that bell so you don't miss a video. If you want to help the channel out, there are lots of ways down in the description to do so. Make sure to check out the Gemmy app and the Patreon for your one-on-one coaching with yours truly, as well as your crossword competitive articles. I did actually post an earlier version of this deck on the Patreon because it's the deck I really just wanted to ride out set 10 with, and I think it's very, very good. Like I've been saying in a lot of videos, I think green's a lot better than people give it credit for. Besides that, guys, TCG player, Dex Protection down there. That being said, let's get started. So getting into just the leader. So obviously the green leader of choice for most decks in this format is Dredge Goku. Now I've been saying for a while that I think Clash Goku is better, and before that I kind of thought it was just worth exploring more than Dredge Goku. And the main reason is because of how Dragon Ball Super works. And what I mean by that is Dredge Goku attacks, mills 3, and draws a card, right? So it puts 3 cards into your drop. The way that Dragon Ball Super works, we're going to draw so many cards just inherently with how the game works that I want to be able to put the cards in my hand that I want in the drop area. I want to be able to put them there fluidly. I don't want to have to combo a Ribrianne, or I don't want to have to combo a Roshi that I could have just put there with my leader because I happen to draw it. So basically this leader gives you mill control, and if you think about it, you're putting the same number of cards into the drop area that Dredge Goku puts. You're also seeing 2 new cards, which both of those, in my opinion, just outweigh Dredge Goku entirely. You awaken at 4 life instead of Dredge Goku, which can awaken earlier, but honestly, you know, even like the most successful build I've seen was Scott Dashie's first place list, and he didn't even play the early self-awaken. He just played literally to awaken at 4 life. Untap 2 is absolutely incredible. And the backside, you do stop milling, but by the time you awaken, which in this build, what I try and do is by like turn 4 awaken. So the backside not milling is perfectly fine. This leader is actually a powerhouse. Attack, sparking 5, draw a card. If you have a Krillin in your drop, this card gains plus 5k and double strike. Actually incredible for dealing with unisons, which, you know, in this format is definitely a pretty big thing. So let's move this over to the side. Let's get into the main deck. We will start with our unisons. So we are playing 4 copies of Bardock Paternal Unison. This deck is pretty much built to abuse this card. You'll see a lot of these like just green good card decks. They'll use the Maiden Transformation engine, and that wasn't the main hand control engine I wanted to use because it's pretty easily countered by cards like God Stealing Technique Trunks and like Denial of Hope and the other 2-drop extra card counterplays if people play them. So I really wanted to lean into this because green can struggle against blue for that very reason. So using this as my main discard outlet, it's been really good in testing. So again, this deck has been tested a lot. I didn't play it at any particularly large tournaments, but this is the deck that I would have played at the CGU 1K. So going into the next unison, we have 3 copies of Demigra Unison of Sorcery. This is what I wanted to play at either 2 or 3, and I went back and forth on it quite a bit, but the reason I ended up going with 3 is because there are several matchups where you do actually want to be very, very aggressive. And 2 of those matchups in particular are Invoker and Sin Shenron. It can actually be pretty tough to beat Sin Shenron once they get to their 6 energy and just, you know, revive a bunch of dragons. But getting the Demigra early is really strong because 1, it lets you, you know, put on 15k pressure starting on turn 1, and 2, it puts your Frieza online early, meaning you can pop their 4-drop Sin, preventing them from going into their 9-drop Sin. And then against Invoker is not as bad of a matchup for my testing, but still, the turn 1 15k attacker, Invoker can fold to pressure like that. So I do like this card at 3 a lot in the deck. You know, 6-7 unisons, generally pretty good. I know unison is still new to set 10 really, so trying to figure out, you know, the best numbers of unisons, I think 6 to 7 is pretty good. Some decks will play more, some decks will play less. Next up, we have 4 copies of Hasty Dispatch Dispo. A lot of lists you'll see will play like 3 or 2 if they even play it. Like I mentioned before, this list really wants to abuse Bardock Paternal Unison, so we're playing this at 4 copies because, you know, if you have one in hand, you pitch it with your Unawakened leader, and then if you have one of these in the drop area or one of the numerous 1-drops I'll show you in just a minute, you can basically revive them, you know, because a Unison doesn't count as a card in your battle area. So Dispo allows you to revive your 1-drops as long as Paternal Unison's the only card in your drop. So typically turn 1, you want to start with some 1-drop. There are better 1-drops than this to start off with, but you can play this on turn 1 if you need to. Turn 2, play your Paternal Unison Bardock, pop off your 1-drop, and then from there, as long as you get Dispo in the drop area, you can continue to loop and keep reviving your various 1-drops. So going in some other 1-drops in the deck, we are playing 3 copies of Krillin Calling for Help. This is just our turn 1, draw 1. I really did want to play more of this card. I wanted to play 4 copies because seeing your turn 1, draw 1 does help out quite a bit just for filtering your deck and turning on your Paternal Unison. But I did want to make certain, you know, concessions in the deck, and this is a 54 card list, by the way, so you know, you play a little bit more beef in the deck because it is a mill strategy. But besides that, I did want to play more copies of this for the turn 1, draw 1, but I did have to make some concessions. But this was replaced with more 1-drops, believe it or not, and I'll explain that in just a second. So with that being said, this card is quite good. Going to the Awaken side, it is a bit unfortunate that this becomes a 4-drop in the drop area, so you can't quite revive it with your Dispo, but that's okay. We do have other 1-drops to recycle. By the time we get Awaken, you'll have a ton of other 1-drops in the drop area. So Krillin at 3 was quite good for those purposes. And then the blocker on the Awaken side too, you know, that can come up in really random scenarios. Next up, 2 Negotiator Krillin. Now this found its way into the main deck when Bibidi was at full power, and it was testing very, very well because Dispo actually, when it revives the 1-drop, it negates their skills, but only for the turn that it's revived. So going into your opponent's next turn, this card actually comes back online, and what it does is, if you haven't seen it in a while or ever, because this card hasn't ever really been super meta relevant, what it does is, when you combo it from the battle area, you choose one of your opponent's battle cards in their combo area and you send it to the drop area. It's a 1-drop barrier, so you do have to pay 1 for it because it does have to be comboed from the field to get its effect, but that's perfectly fine. Like, you can play this on turn 1, you can even play it for technically 0 energy using Hasty Dispatch Dispo, and like I said, once it goes back to your opponent's turn, its effect will be online. Once I had Bardock Paternal Unison and this Krillin on the field, it was pretty much GG against Vegex. They really couldn't drop Bibidi because I had 2 ways to basically nullify their combo. Now, with the Bibidi nerf going into the CGU 1K, I didn't have a lot of time to make changes to the deck. You know, like I said, really less than a week until we knew that it was going to be the Bibidi nerf errata going into that tournament. But besides that, I would keep it in the main deck because, interestingly enough, he is actually a regular Krillin, not a Krillin GT, even though this is from the GT era. So he does actually work with your backside leader. So this is technically playing 5 copies of Krillin, and that plus its combo effect, which is actually quite good, was enough to convince me to keep it in the main deck, giving us 5 Krillins to potentially get in the drop. Next up, for another 1-drop, we have 1 Dodoria, the Cold-Blooded. So our 1-drop Double Striker, this is helpful for 1, getting Self-Awaken, and 2, for dealing with Unisons. And then, you know, like I said before, when your Krillin is a 4-drop on your leader's backside, thanks to its kind of stupid permanent there, you get to bring back cards like Dodoria if you just need a random 1-drop to start cycling off with your Bardock Paternal Unison. Next up, for the last 1-drop, we have 4 Vegeta the Lone Prince. Now, this is not a card you'll often pop off with Bardock Paternal Unison, but there are actually some instances where that will be the right play. One of those instances being like in the super late game, you play this thing, make them pitch a card. If they have like maybe 1 or 2 more cards in hand, you activate Bardock Paternal Unison, you make them pitch their last card, and then your leader can go in for that last double strike of the game and end the game that way. So that's actually quite a good way to maneuver that. But besides that, I go with this super combo over the other options, the other options being Paragus and the other option being Android 18, because I really do value that the fact that this card makes your opponent pitch 1 and that it draws you 1. Of course, this card is vulnerable because you have to play it to the field to get your opponent to pitch a card, but you know, you have to kind of be confident as a player in the sense that if you know when to play this thing down and you know when it's going to be safe to do so, you're going to get the maximum value out of this card. You know, it is a risky thing to do, but if you kind of know your different scenarios, know when it's safe to play this, know when it's not safe to play this, you're going to pay off big time from a card like this. And it's really cool to see a card like that because it gives you options as a player, and those options can either reward you or, you know, harm you or punish you in a game time scenario, which I think is, you know, great for, you know, skill intensive competitive card gameplay. Next up, for the negate lineup, we have 4 copies of Dormant Potential Unleashed. This again was at 4 for the Vegex format, but besides that, I mean, there's a lot of aggro in the format. So playing 4 copies of this felt quite good. You can recycle it pretty easily with some stuff we'll talk about in just a few minutes. Next up, we have 2 copies of Shocking Deathball and 1 copy of For the Greater Good. So, you know, we have our 4 dormant, which isn't actually a hard negate, and then adding these, we have 3 more actual, you know, hard negates. So with that being the case, this all felt really, really good. The 1 for the greater good, definitely for the Invoker matchup where they can play Victory Strike and kill this out of your hand. So having it in the drop area, you can still basically stop the Victory Strike, which is definitely quite helpful. The Sparking on Shocking Deathball, always pretty much good. And to recycle our extra cards, we have 3 copies of Master Roshi, Kamehameha Origins. A lot of like green good card lists play 4 of this. I felt 3 to be fine. There's another card in the deck too that recycles extra cards we'll talk about in just a minute. But yeah, 3 was okay. I never really wanted more of it. It was always in the drop when I needed it in testing. Next up, we're playing 4 copies of Frieza Charismatic Villain. This obviously complements incredibly well with our Unison, especially the Demigra getting it online early. Demigra also having its own protection is helpful as well. And we have 2 copies of Zamasu Deity's Wrath. I've been testing this card a lot, and when you do play it, it's incredibly powerful, but me and my team have noticed that the opportunities to play this card are very, very slim, meaning like, you know, the Frieza doesn't have a ton of protection. You know, getting it online and having this in your hand at the perfect time is a pretty specific combo. So really, it just proves the point that the Zamasu Deity's Wrath is not a card you need by any means. So you can definitely play a deck like this without it. But besides that, unfortunately, this is a very heavy draft box oriented deck list. We are playing 4 Kakunsa. Card's great. I honestly really prefer this over a card like Topo. I mean, it's not like you can play Topo in this deck, but what I mean is like this thing answers any card in the game, you know, ignoring barrier, or, you know, besides barrier, I mean to say. And that feels really strong, especially against Vegex, dealing with their 7-drop Vegex, and other just big battle cards like that, like the 9-drop Sin. It does help out quite a bit. Next up, we're playing 3 copies of Super 17 Power Distilled. This card's actually an MVP against Vegex, believe it or not. I know I'm talking a lot about Vegex, but still a deck we have to worry about going forward. You know, potentially can be very, very strong in the future. But basically, playing this for 4 against Vegex, it feels bad to tap out, but you know, even if you were forced to awaken earlier, playing this tapped out and getting back Dormant Potential Unleashed, and then maybe like a Shocking Deathball for a Sparking Negate, that can actually just straight up buy you turns. And that's a pretty valid maneuver in just about any matchup. Like, the unfortunate thing is yellow can rest mode this, blue can bounce it back to your hand, and green can pop it with Frieza Charismatic Villain. But against red and against black, this card is really, really, really strong when they can't really counterplay it. Next up, we do have 4 rebrands, and we are playing 3 copies of Sand Instincts. Yes, you do have to play your drop area synergies in a drop area based deck. I know it's a bit unfortunate, but if you're like the ultra competitive green player out there, this is what I highly recommend. You don't really want to max out on Sand Instincts. You can maybe even go to 2, because when you draw him, you cannot, you know, pitch him with your unawakened leader. So that is one of the you know, lesser synergies of the deck, but besides that, it is quite good. And then finally, we are playing the Primal Carnage Ape. I'm not playing Celzino because we're not playing the Maiden Engine, and without the Maiden Engine, it's kind of hard to get 12 on the board. And, you know, with the amount of resources you're ripping from your opponent with this deck, this is kind of the card you want. Just slam it when you know they don't have counterplay, and basically just kill them with it. So overall, 54 cards. This deck is really strong, guys. I do think it's quite good going into set 11 as well, because, you know, we have our defined green decks going into set 11. We have Majin Vegeta and Gotenks. But a deck like this and a deck like Dredge Goku that are just green good card dot deck definitely will still have a place in the meta as well. So I do want to keep you guys aware of that. Also, shout out to the Digimon playmat. You know, considering we got the announcement Digimon's coming to the United States for the card game, very cool to have this playmat here as well. Wanted to get that in the deck profile for you guys. That being said, let me know in the comments below what you think. Thank you guys for watching, and I will see you next time.